Hello everyone, Leaf here. This is going to be a continuation video. If you haven't seen the first one that I made on my YouTube channel, I'm talking about near-death experience and generally just my philosophy on life and the universe and spirituality. Really broad topics there, but if you haven't seen the first video, I highly recommend it because there's going to be some overlap here and some concepts that I touched on there that are going to directly correlate to this video. Today I'm going to be talking specifically about an experience that I had this past Thursday that is related in a sense to what I was talking about before with what I went through in the car wreck and what I experienced in that sort of otherworldly state. I didn't talk too much in the other video about what I actually experienced in that other state, which I'm going to get into a little bit more here because I feel like it's pertinent and I feel like it's something that needs to be shared because I believe that it will bring me peace to share it, and it might bring some of you who have experienced some similar things peace to hear it as well. I was talking with a friend earlier about how overanalyzing and overthinking can be a real curse, and I definitely felt that on Thursday night because I kept having these thoughts, and I would realize that whenever I was able to actually let go, which wasn't very many times, I was holding on really hard because I kept feeling like if I let go that I would dissolve, that I would cease to exist in this plane of existence. It was a very dramatic and very extreme. It was very extreme, and I was aware that it was extreme, and it created this interesting duality shift in my mind where I would pull myself out of whatever I was experiencing with this sort of rational critic mind and try to grasp at it that way. So I was analyzing the experience from within the experience, which was increasing my panic state. And all of this happened really, really spontaneously. I attempted to go to a party downtown where there was a bunch of fire spinning happening, and it was really cool for a few minutes. But as soon as I got there, I'd had a really hard day. I'd had a really busy day at work, and I was really stressed out. And I got there, and instantly my social anxiety just would not let me relax. I was in a full state of tension from the moment that I arrived there. And I became aware recently that a lot of my anxiety spurs from the fact that I'm not sure that I ever fully learned how to breathe again after my accident. Because in the accident I collapsed a lung and I broke 4 of my ribs. So during the healing process, it was excruciatingly painful for me to breathe. It was next to impossible. So I was in the hospital, and I had these breathing machines that were supposed to rehabilitate my ability to breathe. But I resorted to taking these short, gasping, shallow breaths because everything else was just mind-bogglingly painful. And so I would attempt to take these deep breaths, but I would breathe in, and right as I would start to feel my lungs inflate, there was a catch, and I could just feel this sharp shooting pain that would shoot down this whole side of my body. And you can actually see I have a nice little scar here from where they reinflated my lung. I was administered surgery to insert a tube into my lung while I was still in shock from the wreck. So that was a very traumatic experience. Honestly, a little bit more traumatic, I think, at least consciously, for me than the wreck itself, because I was fully awake and aware by this point, and I was in a lot of pain, and I'd never been through surgery before, and so the idea of going through surgery after I had just survived something so incredibly powerful and something so incredibly life-altering, it was a terrifying experience. And I was in the hospital room looking at these doctors, telling them that I was not able to handle going into surgery in this mindset. And I was asking for pain medication, and I was asking for help. And it just seemed like they were just going to do whatever it was that they were going to do, and I just kind of had to deal with it. And it's a similar feeling when these panic attacks set on. And so I can kind of trace that correlation back to these types of really extreme moments where I wasn't in control, where I had completely lost all ability to have a say-so in what was happening to me. And it's the same feeling during these panic attacks. And so I was downtown, and I was at this party, and was watching some fire spinning, and I had this dread and this paranoia just start to come over me, and I was like, oh, that's silly, you know, why are you stressed? You know, you're here, you're among friends. There's things that you enjoy that are happening, and tried to like bring myself back that way, just kind of rationalizing and grounding myself. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. I went to the bathroom and everything was, yeah, I don't really fully know how to describe the paranoid state, but if you've ever experienced inexplicable paranoia, you know what I mean. Everything just kind of takes on this sinister aspect, and it doesn't matter. Any amount of rationalization won't change your perception of what you're experiencing. It takes over everything. It's very overshadowing of any sort of positive reinforcement you might be able to give it. And that's a very scary thing in and of itself. And so I was at this party and just decided I was going to walk it off. I was going to walk around the block and clear my head, and it was going to be fine. And so I walked around the city block, and by the time I got to the opposite side from the bar that I was at, my heart rate had increased, my breathing had become even more belabored. And this is a pattern that I've been noticing with these panic attacks, that as I start to give in more and more to the panicked thoughts, the body responds physiologically, and my heart rate increases to a pretty scary level, and I'm not able to control that at all. And that kind of forces me into that panic state, and it keeps me in that panic state. So I decided to walk home, that I was just going to call it a night, that it didn't matter, that I wasn't able to handle it. And I still had that critic mind going, you know, oh, you're the person that can't get out of his house, or you're the person who's just irrationally terrified of everything, and that's a really unfortunate thing. But I was like, that doesn't matter. I need to be safe. I need to be in my safe place. I need to ground myself. I'm going to do that. So I walked home, and the thought reel continued. It was propelling me even further into that panic state. And by the time I got home, I was full-blown panicking. It was completely irrational at that point. It wasn't caused by any sort of outward stimulus. It was just a pure panic state. And so I came into the house and tried to calm down. I was going to make myself some tea, and the outlet that the kettle plugs into for the tea blew out. And at that juncture, in that sort of panic state, it was a catalyst for an even increased sense of panic. Even though it was something very minuscule and very small, it shattered what little sense of confidence I had left, and I didn't have anything to distract me at that point. And I noticed that my heart was racing. I noticed that I had physical chest pain happening, and I felt like I couldn't get a breath. And at that point, I had the thought, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. And so I began to drink some water. I began to look through the medicine cabinet for aspirin or anything that I knew would counteract the effects of a heart attack, and I couldn't find anything. And at this point, my cats were picking up on my sort of frantic energy, and they were running around the house wailing, running into shit, not really being conducive to calming down. They were panicking just as hard, if not harder than I was, which was scary at the time. It seemed like my whole world was in this same state of panic, and it completely shot me off into this otherworldly region of sheer, utter panic. Um, and I began looping in my head. I began um, seeing the same things over and over again. I was pacing around my house, and it would build and build and build and build and build. And if you've ever experienced an ego loss or a disillusion of self, it was very similar. I began to um, fear the actual passage to the other side more than I was fearing what I was experiencing. And so it created this sort of weird disassociative state that I recognized that I had experienced during the wreck as well. Except this time I was a lot more conscious and I was a lot more fearful as a result of that. So it seemed a lot more intense and a lot less full of love and harmony and hope as the other experience had, but it still had the same hallmarks and trademarks as the other experience at times. Um, and so eventually I got to this really strange place where I was convinced that I was having a heart attack over and over and over and over again. And when it would build and get to that point of death where I felt like there's no way that it can go past this moment, this is it, this is it, this is it, I would disassociate from my body. And this happened 5 or 6 times throughout the night, and I would go to this sort of nether region in my head, and I was completely disconnected from my body. In fact, I was actually convinced that I was in some sort of disembodied spiritual state in which I was looking for my body, trying to figure out what had happened. And so I was pacing around my house looking for my body, and when I found it, it would instantly shoot me back into the, oh, I'm having a heart attack. And I would get up out of bed, I would sit up really fast, and I would like run to the bathroom and like splash water on my face, go to the kitchen, try to drink some water, be like, all right, you need to calm down. And then I would try to get a breath, realize I still couldn't breathe, and it would happen all over again. And this happened for close to 3 hours. And my wife was at work. I was calling her, convinced that I was dying. But at the same time, and this is where it got really strange for me, there was still this voice in my head that was saying that you're overreacting, you're being overdramatic. I wasn't able to draw a conclusive statement to say whether or not I needed help, and so I contemplated calling 911, and that seemed like it was just going to freak me out more. So I didn't do that, and I called Meg, and she asked me if she wanted me to, or if I wanted her to call an ambulance, and I said no, I wasn't sure if we needed that, and we don't need to go into more debt if this is just a panic attack. But it was still, even just talking about this does this absolutely no justice at all. It was absolutely the most terrifying thing I've ever been through in my life. And so finally she called one of our friends, and our friend Alicia managed to come over. And at that point I was slightly more lucid. I feel like I'd been looping through this sort of heart attack space for so long that my actual conception of the outside world had begun to dissolve. Language was really hard for me at that point. I couldn't conceptualize what was happening in my head. It was profoundly psychedelic. Profoundly. It was so bizarre. I could not grasp reality. Or at least not this version of reality in a very visceral sense. And so in spite of all these panic terror moments, there were some just some absolutely beautiful moments as well. I paused in front of my mantle, and I'll actually turn the camera so you can see it. There's a God's eye above my mantle that my wife made. And I paused in front of it during one of my pacing escapades and just experienced this cohesion, just this moment of flow where everything in my head, at this point it was really hallucinatory, so I couldn't really tell what was real. thoughts were sort of just flowing like a river through my head, and I felt this convergence right in front of my mantle, and I stopped and I put my hands together, and I just breathed for a solid 4 or 5 minutes in front of this mantle, and I felt like at that moment I experienced the universe answering its own question. That was the sense that I got, that this universe exists for the purpose of love, which I knew consciously. That was a concept that I took away from my last experience, and one that I talked about pretty extensively in the last video. But this was a beautiful reminder of that, and I had this thought that being a deep thinker and being someone who is prone to philosophy and figuring everything out, I have a drive within me that oftentimes does not allow me to just let go and just feel. And it was this transcendent awareness of the universe as a sensual experience. And I don't mean sensual in the sense of like sexual or physical pleasure. I mean sensual in the sense that everything is a feeling, is an emotion, is this sort of deeper sense of knowing than we can experience with concepts or with ideals or with beliefs. And I realized that I spent all of this time and effort trying to craft language and codify this experience, and very little time actually feeling it and experiencing it. And throughout the night, there were 4 or 5 of these really transcendent, profound moments where it just, that shut off, the thinking mind shut off, and it was just pure perceptual awareness. And yeah, it was everything. And it seems really juvenile to say that from my perspective, because I'm constantly trying to craft this really detailed language and philosophy behind what I believe. But I think that those moments are what made this experience so profound, was the destructuring, the sort of breaking down of this language, of this concept. And I'm going to end this video before it gets too long so that it makes it something that's watchable, because I don't want it to be intimidating, but I'll definitely be making more of these because I gained a lot of experience and a lot of insight from this experience, and I want to be able to share that with you guys and hopefully help you on your own journey, and through the medium of sharing and sort of creating this journal, to integrate more of these experiences into my own life as well. But one last takeaway before I call this one quits. I had this moment where I realized that there is a difference between understanding and knowing, because there was a part of me that connected to what I would call the higher self. Different people may call it different things. You might call it God, you might call it the universe, you might call it the collective unconscious, whatever. I refer to it as the higher self because I have come to realize in my own beliefs and my own concepts of what is true, that there is only one being, that everything that exists is an expression of that and is not this sort of separate self. And we are, as humans and as beings which are experiencing this sort of temporal expression of the universe, we experience everything in a dichotomy. So we experience life and death. We experience dark and light. And we codify our whole experience based off of these concepts because we have no ability to process a self-referenced being. Because in our universe, there is no self-referenced being. Everything exists in relationship to something else. So in a way, our very existence is a metaphor, because we're always comparing a feeling to something else. We're comparing what our brain is like when we encounter another brain. We compare a sensation of touch and compare it to the sensation of not touching, even though there's no difference, because everything, matter, is essentially light, which is slowed down to a really slow vibration, which allows it to take manifest form. And above that level, everything is primarily water and air. And there's a few other building blocks to that as well. But there isn't really a separation between us and anything else. And we experience it because we have edges. You know, we have fingers and toes, and we only grow to a certain proportion, and then we stop. And I can reach out and put my hand out there, and I don't have an experience of touching anything. It's empty space to us, when we know that it's really not. There's dust in the air, and there's air molecules everywhere. And I myself am made up of primarily empty space, and that also is kind of a crazy thought. But anyway, all of that to say, I experienced the difference between understanding and knowing, because when I was able to turn off the conscious mind and let go of the critic and let go of the commentary that's constantly running in our heads, I knew things on a much deeper level, and I felt like the entirety of reality was laid out before me, and I understood it. It's not that I consciously comprehended it, because I didn't. And that's the difference. That's the difference between knowing and understanding. Because here we seek to understand. We seek to have an experience and compare it to something. And that's not the true nature of perception. The true nature of perception is just a pure state of being. It's a pure state of knowing. And it is abiding within the great mystery that is the universe, that is God, if you will. And that's where I'm going to end this video today. So feel free to hit the comments with any questions. It's very, very incomplete. There will be more to follow as well. But like I said earlier, I just want to make this watchable and hopefully have you guys be able to glean some real knowledge and real peace from this video. May you be at peace and at rest on your journey. Namaste.